excited for this conversation because, again, so one of the things that we're doing moving forward at Goodie Nation is starting to make connections across cities, right? Again, creating opportunities not only for founders, but investors and other people in the startup community. So we have some dope people across some of the top cities in the U.S., and we're going to talk about how do we create these opportunities. Again, we want people to have questions and give insight and stuff like that. But before we begin, Ariel, start with you. If everyone can just quickly share, who you are, what you're working on, and what city you represent.
Okay. Hello. Welcome to what is now my city, Atlanta. Very, very happy to be here, and thank you, Joey, for the opportunity. I wear multiple hats. I lead technology and innovation for Invest Atlanta. I also work very closely with the mayor's office. There is a huge push to turn Atlanta into a top 5 tech hub. So I am behind the scenes creating a strategic plan to do that. I myself am also a founder. I have a company called NAC in the HR tech space. And we were also a very proud member of the Goodie Nation community.
There it is.
Hey guys, Keenan Williams from New York City. I'm currently co-founder of Resi. We're a growth equity stage fintech business. We created bonds backed by apartment cash flows that we sell to Wall Street investors. And I'm also the founder of Stratum Growth, an advisory firm for early stage startups. But most importantly, I support Joey and Goodie Nation as a PM. And candidly, this should be a packed room because what Goodie Nation is doing is still one of one. There's yet to be anybody trying to make impact in the ecosystem like you are, so super glad to be here.
There it is.
What up, y'all? I'm Isaiah Coleman. I'm from Brooklyn, but I work and live in Tulsa. I work for an economic development nonprofit called In Tulsa, where we focus on helping companies grow and scale through talent strategies, services, and other resources that we provide through a multi-layer ecosystem that is backed by the George Kaiser Family Foundation.
How's everybody doing? I'm Maurice Boissiere, originally from New Orleans, so down south, but live in DC now. I've been in DC for a really long time. By day, I'm a venture capitalist, focused on cybersecurity, pre-seed cybersecurity companies. That's why in DC, that's kind of a big thing in DC. It's also a big thing here. But I also help to organize and run the Black VC community in the Washington, DC area. And I think that's my hat here.
There it is.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm Celeste Shields. Hey, everyone. It's really, really exciting to be here. I'm even more excited to be repping Los Angeles. That is my hometown. Specifically, grew up in San Fernando Valley. But really excited to be a part of Goodie Nation as a performance partner, really helping out the founders, grow, build, scale as best I can, being a connector for them. And in addition to working with Goodie Nation, I also have my own business where I do operations and project management consulting for typically startups and small businesses, helping them streamline their operations, building out projects for them, and things like that. But on the side, outside of all of it, super connector. If I can connect all the founders to all the VCs, all the resources, that really is my ethos and one of my big goals in life.
Awesome. So let's talk about, and Maurice, I'm going to start with you. We're going to talk about strengths of your local startup communities and trends and stuff like that. Ariel, Southern hospitality, we gotta let and so I'm from Mobile, Maurice. Not sure if you knew that. So pretty close to New Orleans and stuff. So Maurice, you mentioned cyber and stuff like that. But what's going on in the DC startup community?
But so DC I love DC. It's one of the most entrepreneurial cities in the world if people gave government contractors a role as entrepreneurs. So we have a lot of entrepreneurs who start companies selling to the government. And live very good lifestyles doing that. But it's not a traditional venture capital kind of business because it's labor intensive. And so, but DC is a very entrepreneurial environment. The sectors that we have, if you just think about, look, anything that's regulated, there's probably a good talent pool of people in DC who know a lot about it. So cybersecurity happens to be one because you've got all these 3-letter organizations that do a lot of cybersecurity, and it just happens to be one that my firm focuses on because of that. But outside of that, you also have a lot in the medical/healthcare space. So a lot of biosciences. If you just think of NIH is there. So you have these kind of clusters, a lot in education, especially around education policy. And then I don't know why this is one, but we have I think every city has a pretty robust fintech community, but we've also had a pretty robust fintech community with a lot of crypto folks in that one as well.
And do you see the investors in that space like follow those areas, or essentially are you saying there's a bunch of founders or startups in those areas and investors, or is it one or the other?
Yeah. I mean, the capital kind of finds the demand, right?
Yeah.
So just in cyber alone, there are 5 cyber-only funds in the DC area. Like literally, that's all they do is cyber. Like,
Wow.
we don't touch anything else. A couple of them are like big funds, like $300-400 million funds that that are stage agnostic. But then you have a lot of big ones that dabble in cyber, like 20%, 30% of their portfolio. So you see it in cyber as one. I don't do healthcare, but I think that also exists in healthcare. We have a lot of funds that are very healthcare specific, and also something called dual use technology, which is basically military applications. We have a lot of funds and founders who have spent their time in the military and come out. It's kind of like this new kind of sector that's kind of getting some legs.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I want to
We
go.
definitely see it.
There it is. I'll go to Isaiah, and then Celeste next. Isaiah, what are you seeing in Tulsa? What's the strengths and trends there?
Definitely cyber. Cyber is one of our big trends. We have the most NSA graduates that come out of University of Tulsa for whatever reason that is, but it happens. So definitely cyber, advanced aerial mobility, virtual health, and one of our biggest plays right now is BIPOC founders. So if it's in the tech industry, Tech Enable is one of our main focuses. One of our partner organizations called Build in Tulsa focuses on helping entrepreneurs that are BIPOC and bringing them access and opportunity. That's really like the trend of Tulsa, is the intersection between intentionality, resources, and opportunities are almost unparalleled from being in each and every one of these cities before. And one of the things that we're focusing on is providing different opportunities, different access. So we have, I think we're on our 4th cohort of Techstars through Build in Tulsa. That's in Tulsa. We have capital players like Lightship Capital. We have our own in our ecosystem called Ateno Capital. So it's a lot spread through vertical focuses, but a lot of it is focused on bringing economic development to BIPOC companies, whether they're already in Tulsa or looking to expand and grow. We have access, opportunity, and resource available for them.
Nice. And before I go to Celeste, so also is there like a program, is it Tulsa Remote or something like that?
Yep, Tulsa Remote is one of our bigger programs where we'll pay anybody up to $10,000 if they have a remote job. They can relocate to Tulsa. They can put it towards a house. They put it towards what a business we've had people do as well. And we're actually working on some things to do that for founders as well within our ecosystem. So we are super innovative by any means necessary. Like, hey, come to Tulsa, see what's going on, and then you'll see what's special about it.
Nice. Celeste, so what do you see in the LA startup? I mean, LA is a lot different geographically in a lot of different ways, and you connect founders and you know a lot of VCs. Like, what are you just, generally speaking, seeing in the LA startup community?
Well, it's a lot sunnier, so we're very happy over there. But no, the trends, I mean, I think you can ask a lot of folks from LA and they might have different answers. You might say fintech, B2B SaaS, different things like that. But what I always see, at least in the communities that I run in, is that a lot of folks in LA, VCs in LA, accelerators in LA, programs in LA are typically working to increase access to opportunity to the tech and VC space. We want to make sure that the tech and VC ecosystem is representative of the Los Angeles that we see every day. We have a Latinx community of more than 45% in Los Angeles, and we want to make sure that if there is an access gap, if there is an education gap, if there's an opportunity gap, how can we address that to really make sure we're represented there? And I'm really excited to see all of the VCs birthing out of Los Angeles because they really are intentional there. I'll just name a couple of resources that I like to always direct founders to in LA if they're not familiar with it. some accelerators that do not take equity from organizations are like Grid 110 as well as Plug in South LA. Of course, we have Techstars LA that has tons of different verticals in LA and a lot of exciting companies coming out of there as well. We also have a huge aerospace community in the South Bay, actually. Starburst Aerospace Accelerator and VC Fund. An organization I work with very closely that I have to shout out because a lot of my connections are through them is Pledge LA. They're a really exciting program working to increase access to tech and venture capital space. And everything they do, their mission every single day is how are we creating opportunities, addressing the access gap that just exists in this space. And it's more than just getting more dollars to funders of color. It's also how do we get more young people of color into these VC seats earlier. I helped run a VC internship program in the past that helped connect folks of color, both undergraduates and graduate students actually, to VC roles, to some of their first VC roles, in internships and things like that. And also in the funder space, I also love to call it Black VC, love them. The LA chapter is also very lit, so I'm sure DC is great too. But Black VC, Latinx VC, All Raise, as well as another organization, nonprofit organization that works to support female founders and funders. So I name all these resources to say that we are doing, at least from where I'm sitting, we're trying to do a lot to support folks in the ecosystem, especially diverse founders and funders in the ecosystem.
Nice. Keenan, let's go to you. All right, let's go all the way across the country. I mean, you've been a founder, built in New York. I mean, what is it like being a startup founder in New York?
So New York's a cheat code, I think, for a lot of people. I'm a YC founder from 2017. New York's the second largest alumni network of YC grads. We have a pretty direct line to Silicon Valley. So A16Z, for instance, third quarter, the fintech investments in New York beat Silicon Valley for A16Z, where their HQ is. That's the first time that's ever happened. So New York City, there's been a plethora of cash for fintech. Not so much prop tech anymore, but B2B SaaS, even though nationwide investment has gone down, New York is still a very big B2B SaaS market. And the other piece of the cheat code, aside from having extensive networks for alumni from different accelerators like Techstars and YC and 500, the VC community is incredibly tapped in New York. So most often founders don't even have to really go through the process of trying to meet each other. There's so many VC-led or advisory services-led meetups that founders can go direct. So it pretty much looks like this conference every week. The hard part, though, is, as no one is surprised, it's for founders of color, it's actually quite hard because you still have to have at least that entry point of being in the WhatsApp chat that actually sends out the right invites. If you just stay based on, if your inbox stays full of invites that are just based on you being on general mail lists, you really won't be tapped in. But I have found that founders of color have been GroupMe-esque this year. Does anyone remember GroupMe, the app?
Yeah.
Like, remember how GroupMe had all the channels? So that effort's actually coming back really strong in New York City, especially for the early stage. I think post-Series B, I've had to do extra effort to stay tapped in because once you get to that level, unfortunately, it gets real thin. And the only people we end up talking to are investors. And so really excited to be putting in the work to try to build bridges for the early stage folks.
Interesting. So New York is a heavy WhatsApp.
Yeah.
You got to be in the right.
Yeah, for sure. Like New York City is the right chat room, or not chat rooms, the right group chats. Once you start to go to certain events, you start to meet the people that make the lists. So you stop signing up for things that are general, and you start getting direct access. And then number three, really, it's the accelerator world. So if you went to Morgan Stanley Inclusive Venture Labs, YC, or Techstars, the alumni network that stays in New York City is really robust.
Yeah. So to give context, we are New York Startup Week, or Tech Week, excuse me, is in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. We're going to do an event up there on Tuesday the 17th, and we were looking through the list of events. This was like last week. There was 73 other events on a Tuesday.
Yeah.
On a Tuesday.
Yeah.
I was like, oh man, maybe it's like a lot of competition. I was like, well, damn.
Yeah, that's like when I tell you, that's every single day in New York City.
Yeah.
Every day.
Yeah. Okay.
But also, Joey, a lot of noise, right? If you're not tapped in, you'll just be going through the malaise.
Now, what I can say, looking through those lists of 73, there was like one event, maybe two, focused on women founders, and nothing for Black Latinx founders.
Yeah.
On a Tuesday now, I'm saying on a Tuesday. And so we tapped in and we labeled our event diversity, and boom, 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 boom.
Correct.
A lot of RSVP started coming in.
And that's the hard part. New York is still very bro culture. It's Silicon Valley 2.0. Like, it's still very white male dominated. But the corporate dollars behind diversity are actually huge in New York City still, even after all the things that are happening legally.
Nice. Okay, Ariel, bring us on, homie. Sell us on Atlanta. What's happening here?
Oh, there's so many cool things. I mean, what I will say is I'm very biased to New York. I moved from Brooklyn in 2019, and I always tell founders this story. If you are a founder of color, if you are a female founder, there's literally just a handful of cities that even make sense in the US for you to live. So leaving New York, I was like, well, it's either gonna be DC, LA, potentially Miami, Austin. I thought about the Bay. I think the biggest misconception is tech and innovation lives in the Valley. And I just am all about breaking that misconception. So I was like, I'm not gonna go live in San Francisco and pay just as much as I'm already paying in New York. And I really wanna make that point because it's not just about creating an environment for you to build and do your best work. It's also, where do you wanna live, right? Like, I had to be in a community that had representation. I don't wanna be somewhere where I drive out and I don't see anyone that looks like me. I think Goody Nation is such a fabric of the community here in Atlanta. Joey was one of the first people that I talked to. I think even before I moved here, someone was like, you need to have a conversation with Joey. And I was like, okay, that sounds good. Luckily, our company was a recipient of Google's Black Founders Fund. So all the stars aligned. I was going to be a part of Goody Nation regardless. But what I will say is Atlanta is so different from every other city because of the things that make us unique. And I'm just going to throw a few stats at you. So we are #1 in the country for tech diversity. If you look around this room, and granted, we're going to make sure that the rest of Venture Atlanta actually looks like this room, because that is what Atlanta actually looks like. So not only in terms of diverse employees, but diverse teams, diverse founders. We have over 40 accelerators, co-working spaces, and incubators in the city. We have over 57 colleges and universities in the metro Atlanta area. We've minted over 12 unicorns within the last decade. We've deployed, I want to say, roughly $4 billion in capital as of maybe 2022. Unfortunately, that number dipped this year, and we need to do a lot more to get it up. So from where I sit, it's how do we ensure that the startup community gets access to the resources, the funding, the connections, everything that they need so they can continue to grow and scale. I'm a big believer that free money is good money. I think in this market, it's really hard for founders to raise. I've been talking to a lot of friends as of late, whether your valuation is getting cut in half or you're trying to scramble to, do an extension. It's just a tough time. So I purposefully wanted to assist in this role because I wanted to figure out what resources are founders not aware of, whether it be grants or loans, federal contracts. You mentioned what's happening in DC. I talked to someone that advises a founder, and they were able to close a contract for roughly $5 to $10 million. They didn't even have to raise their A round because they got it through a government contract. So I think so many folks are now having to kind of figure out, what are my options? How do I extend runway, especially in this environment? And if I can be a connector to resources that may not be on their radar, that's 100% what I want to do and why I'm here. I do think Atlanta, at some point, will hopefully start making direct investments into startups. That's something that we're working on behind the scenes. We've definitely had conversations around funds of funds. So how do we make sure that a Fearless Fund, a Zane Ventures, a Collab Capital, any of the funds here that have diverse fund managers continue to get the capital that they need so they can deploy it? Unfortunately, I would say for myself, we finally got our first investor that's based in Atlanta maybe 3 months ago, and I've been here for 4 years. I talked to countless founders where if you look at their cap table, no one is in Atlanta. Everyone is in SF or New York or in another city. And we absolutely need to change that. We need to make sure that VCs here are leading rounds. If you're not leading rounds, you're coming into a round. If you can't deploy capital, kindly just sit down and make an introduction to someone that can actually make the wire so the startup community can continue to thrive.
Nice.
Piggyback on that though, I really agree. So I had a conversation last night with an investor, and I said if I were for my next company to be day one early stage, I would actually come to Atlanta, because the thing that Atlanta has better than New York and almost I think equal to Silicon Valley is direct access to technical talent. And so like in New York, there's so many startups that are HQ'd there, but those HQs aren't necessarily full of people that are actively seeking opportunities in next roles. Like it's a very like linear city in terms of tech talent. Atlanta seems hyper diverse, where someone could be full-time at Salesforce and 100% running a startup nights and weekends, or like doing consulting work for startups. I see that way more prevalent now than ever. And so even with the stats of what you guys are trying to do, I think you already are winning from the local domestic talent. And I think it actually starts there. I think founders, before capital even comes into the picture, can you build a product? Can you build a service? Atlanta's a phenomenal place. And this is a New Yorker who, like, my time in Atlanta has only really been from like FAMU coming up on weekends and maybe some like random one-off trips. But the last year, my eyes have been blown up as you guys have expanded. So this is a huge early days opportunity. So I'm glad you're pushing. And those LPs will come, I promise you.
They will come. So many of them are in the room right now. Thank you so much for being here.
She didn't pay me to say that.
And you made a good point in terms of building the business. You know, we're B2B SaaS. So for me, I was like, I have to go somewhere where there's enterprise customers. If I can't do sales, it doesn't make sense for me to come. Atlanta is home to over 20 Fortune 500 companies have their headquarters here. So whether it's Delta or UPS or Coca-Cola, there's so many that are here and thriving. And a lot of them have corporate innovation arms now where they're making direct investments into the startup community as well. So there's a lot of opportunity for growth. And I know I mentioned this earlier, but I'll just nail it home again. Being able to live. I love New York. I miss it every time I get on a plane. As soon as I'm in the city, I feel the energy of it. And that's the beauty of being there. But New York, like, it will chew you out and spit you out. I was exhausted, right? And if you're, thankfully, one of the best things that Goody Nation does is they have founder therapy. And I'm a big proponent of mental health, right? Wellness. I think it took COVID for all of us to kind of have a wake-up call of maybe there's more to life, right? And I think Atlanta just gives you that space to breathe. Like, I can be around people if I want to be around people, but I don't have a homeless person screaming outside of my apartment at 3 a.m. Like, I'm able to sleep, right? I'm able to be around community when I want to be around community, but I'm also able to have that space for myself and go inward. And I think that's a really delicate balance that most cities aren't able to crack.
I mean, excellent points, right? So let's dig into. We talked about the strengths, right? Let's dig into the areas which some of your startup communities may not be as strong, because I want to start talking about how can we take the strengths of Atlanta and then plug them into LA, and then they go to LA to Tulsa, or I'm making this stuff up, right? And Maurice, kind of starting with you, you mentioned cyber and government contracts and stuff like that. What are some of the areas that you see that are not as strong in DC for diverse founders? What I'm talking for diverse founders, and are there any cities up here or others that you can tap into?
I mean, it's definitely a proximity play, right? So, as an investor, I find myself more and more getting to know some of the folks here who are in the industry with Nora Mosley or Tech Square or whatever. But like we just deal flow sharing. And from a founder perspective, I try to do like this little cat and mouse game where I'm play cyber investor on one hand, and then how can I help my brothers and sisters get some access to some folks who are writing checks, right? So I see it on the investor side with this collaboration. It's harder from a founder side because you're in the weeds, right? Like, you're trying to build a business, and and I'm early stage. I don't, so when you get to, you post B stage, is that what I hear? Yeah, when you get to post B, like, it's a whole nother game that they play. Yeah. But I think, investors need to start sort of doing that kind of collaboration. And I see it between Atlanta and DC, and I see it between DC and New York, especially in fintech. But as investors do it, then there's this deal sharing, because most investors do not want to have to get on a 4-hour flight to check in on a portco.
Yeah.
Until that portco is like big enough where it's got staff and resources, and you're not worried about, like, will they be able to close this deal in order to make the quarter kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry, were you finished?
Yeah. No, you look like you were.
Well, I was going to draw a line to Isaiah here, but I mean, both of you all mentioned cyber, right?
Yeah.
Is there any type of relationship between Tulsa and DC?
Not strong.
Not currently, no.
Yeah, not strong. In fact, I got a founder that, man, I was trying to do this deal, but he ended up doing some. His co-founder is in Tulsa, right? So he reached out to me, and that's when I first found out that Tulsa had more NSA grads. And I was like, man, come on, like, really? How is that possible? Like, I went to University of Maryland, and I kind of like, there's no way they have more grads than University of Maryland. But that was the data, and Tulsa just like it's getting it done, with Lightspeed Capital, like they spent some time in Baltimore, D.C. as well, and there's something that comes with just intentionality, period. So the bottom line is like if we start to have intentionality around collaboration, it will happen. Yeah. Right? It's sort of like you were talking earlier about North Star metrics, right? Like it's all about like energy flows, attention goes where energy flows, where attention goes. It's like you put the spotlight on what outcome you want to achieve, and what behaviors you need to go into that, it will happen. So if we say, hey, look, let's figure this out, right? Let's just have a quarterly chat, do some deal flow sharing, let's do some, whatever, like that's where the magic starts to happen. But journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step.
There it is. Any other thoughts for DC or any other ecosystems that you want to tap into?
Honestly, I tap into everybody, because that's I think is the biggest issue with Tulsa is exposure, the lack of exposure. And I live by the law of exposure. Like once somebody's exposed to something, they can't be unexposed. Right. So you go about it and you're like, oh, you're doing this in Tulsa. And to his point, a portco investor doesn't want to fly 4 hours to see a portco. Tulsa's literally in the middle of the country, 2 hours away from everywhere. Mm-hmm. So it's like, hey, maybe we have a place where we meet up, a place where we go about the things we do, even the actual things that are going on to Tulsa. One thing I didn't mention earlier, there's a Black women founders led accelerator that's backed by Goldman Sachs. That's open to anybody in the country. No one knows about it because they think Tulsa, of course not. It can't be. But a lot of people, their point of reference is Black Wall Street and how it was torn down. But they don't understand that it's being rebuilt and what's actually being poured into. Like Oprah just shot a show that Morris Chestnut is debuting this weekend on how we're rebuilding Black Wall Street. So I think tapping into the name that comes with LA, DC, New York, Atlanta, and letting them expose their portcos, their founders, their talent, their investors to what's possible, and tapping in and partnering with what's going on in Tulsa, it just leads to a overall greater experience of getting people access to things that they can't necessarily get access to in these bigger cities just because the level of exposure.
Can I piggyback on that? So I think a cheat code that I've recognized recently, I'm EIR at Techstars for both New Orleans and New York City simultaneously. And what I recognize is with a lot of the companies that are applying, that are coming from across the nation, if they get a no from somebody, I'm hearing way more from founders that Tulsa's, Techstars or Act House, my brother Dominic Artis.
My guy.
Yeah, so we went to FAMU together. And I think that's actually really beautiful. I'm seeing 50% at least of companies that are getting to final rounds and not getting into a New York accelerator, they're all applying to Tulsa. Catapult is a prime example of founder Michelle Dalzone, who was from New York City and like fully planting roots in Tulsa now. So I think the accelerator space is actually building out more bandwidth. And then two, I think VCs doubling down and hiring more people that are heads of platform is the equivalent of an accelerator having like an EIR, where they're bringing in these XIRs or just like professionals who have either had exits or late stage to be connective tissue between founders and investors. I talk now to investors more than even if I was pitching for any round I've ever raised, just by being the role of EIR. And I think that's actually important too. So founders not just going after the person that writes the check, but the person that works for who writes the check. So Melissa was on the stage for the last talk, and that's the MD for the batch I'm EIR for. And so right now, half our conversations are about how many people can I help current batchees under her get connected to resources and investors. And it's purely because she's in Atlanta, I'm in New York, and I can bring resources that just aren't based here. And so I think EIRs, XIRs, and just the heads of platforms at VC funds just as important as speaking to the check writers.
Nice. Celeste, I want to go to you. I mean, what are some ways that, for diverse founders, investors, or more, LA could be better at?
Yeah, I mean, I first want to comment on what both of y'all said because I completely want to double click on that around, I want to tap into everyone because it really just expands your resources and it allows us access, it closes that access gap more and more every time. So I completely agree. And then also on the platform side and on the EIR side, like when I try and connect folks, people think like, oh, you have to talk to the managing partner, you have to talk to your partner, and that's great. If you can get that meeting, amazing. But if you cannot, I mean, those platform teams are also here to super serve you, and they might not be able to. They might say, hey, you're actually not a good fit for my fund, but I know of another fund because they are the connector, the connected tissue, like you said. So just want to double click on that. But you asked about improvements, right? I think mine lies around capital. I mean, I think that's always going to be an improvement across both founders and funders, but I'm going to focus more on the funder side and talk more about more fund of funds. Like I find a lot of female VCs who are managing their own fund, who are raising and they're raising and they're raising and they're raising and they're raising, and it's a different game or a different experience for other VCs maybe that are not women or that are not women of color specifically. So I think getting more dollars into the VC funds, specifically underrepresented VC funds. And I have a little bit of an odd one that I feel passionate about because I do think meeting in person, especially post-pandemic, is so important. That really is how relationships are built. If you can meet a VC at an event and then send them your deck, it's a different experience than even a warm intro or a cold email and sending your deck. And sometimes there are nonprofits, there are organizations, like I mentioned Gridwinton earlier, Plug in South LA, or even Pledge LA, they are trying to connect more folks, but they don't always have the dollars to host these events. They might know a lot of people, but they just need $5,000 to get some free food and drinks. And SVB is a really good example of this. They have continuously supported the LA ecosystem with sponsorship for these events to create these communities in person. So I would say we need even more of that though in LA, because I find that sometimes there are more events for founders who don't look like us sometimes, and we need more, like times 10 the amount of events that we already have. Black VC does an amazing job to cultivate those spaces, but we need even more because there are more organizations that want to do it, but they might not have the funds. So more corporations who can maybe put dollars into those pockets on those activities.
Excellent point. Excellent. I'm actually looking toward New York. I mean, maybe some of those companies are HQ'd in New York, or maybe HQ'd in Atlanta, where they can still, fund opportunities, in LA, in other markets as well, right? Because that's a fertile market. So again, what I'm looking at is how might we connect some of the organizations, or even some of our efforts at Goodie Nation, to corporations based in New York, Atlanta, or something like that, so we can, help to build community and stuff. So when I think of New York, I feel like anybody that you need is based in New York, right? And they're right around the corner.
Yeah.
So,
I think you can literally you can walk within a 20-mile radius in Midtown Manhattan and touch corporate venture firms, CVCs, institutional VC funds, other founders, and then you're also your networks. 20 block radius.
We've done stuff in New York, and again, this is relationships. And I think, Maurice, I don't know if you had a point or something, but relationships will open up doors. So we've done stuff in New York at Twitter's headquarters there. And this is based on one person that we went to school with and opened up a door. Now we're hosting activities like that. I ain't gonna lie, in Atlanta, it's not as easy. If you say, hey, we want to go to Coca-Cola's headquarters and host something for startups, right? New York folks open up that door just like that. And to your point around money, they'll stroke a $5,000 check it ain't nothing, right? But in other cities, it's not as easy. So I think we have to double down on relationships in places like New York, LA, and leverage those relationships for other markets as well.
I've seen the person in New York that got the Twitter connection to host an event, then that person calls their Twitter partner or colleague in Atlanta and gets the same money. I think a lot of people don't ask the corporate money to go city to city.
Yeah.
Like they'll go to New York and just ask Salesforce, can I get a conference room in 5K? But they won't ask that contact to call the same person equivalent to them in Atlanta to do the same thing. So I think the ask has to be way more open and predominant today. Like closed mouths don't get fed is an understatement. Like a buddy of mine in New York City that works at an investment bank that has an accelerator. We were just chatting last night and I was like, hey, you should meet Joey. You should get access to Atlanta. And he was like, yeah, I do want access to Atlanta. I said, hop in a car and come with me. And he came and we went to the Founders Need Therapy session. So I think literally just being that active with the spread of the ask. But I think the other cheat code, and maybe you can opine on this for every market, the founders that have the fastest direct access outside of relationships are the ones that have cash flow. And I think
Yes.
everybody right now knows that cash flow is king and accretive growth is king. And so, you know, Joey, we talked about this all the time. It's one thing to have the intro, it's one thing to meet the person, but when the follow-up happens, are you really prepared for that first and last and often only opportunity to speak the language? And what investors want to hear is not a nice little company, that's a passion project. Are you making cash flow that can be in step function of growth, accretive and large? Like not just the 100 million ARR goal, like that's kind of the B2B SaaS tokenism, but cash flow. And a lot of founders I still don't think are speaking from a place first and foremost to any stakeholder about their cash flow.
I mean, I would say, you said closed mouths don't get fed.
At all.
There are a lot of open mouths in Atlanta. There's a lot of open mouths in New York, in LA, in DC. And I think we need to be honest for everyone that says we invest early stage, we're first check in, but then you turn around and you tell a founder that they need to have $1 million in ARR. We need to stop it. We have to. We have to. And I think for me, how do we get that first check to the founder that needs it? Because look, like we know the market is not the best right now. Maybe you could swing a 2, a 3, a $5 million round. We all know what that looks like if you are a founder of color and the success rate on that, which is very unfortunate. So if we're thinking about that true pre-seed, that first check-in, knowing that folks don't have that access to social capital, so where they can get a friend or a family round up and going, what can the city do to provide that capital?
I have an answer.
Okay.
You have to educate them. So I have to push back on your point. You can say closed mouths don't get fed and refute because you can say there's a lot of open mouths. The point I'm making with Goody Nation is there's a lot of open mouths that aren't saying the right thing.
I agree with that.
Right. So if the first point is I'm trying to get capital, but I can't express to you how I'm resourceful to figure out ways in which to navigate with 100K, the biggest issue is that the stakeholders who are leveraging bias are going to immediately be like, nope, it's not a fit. Because they are in the business of just writing off as many people as possible.
Yeah.
But I do think if there's an ed space, like we were at Rice during the venture crawl for Goody Nation on Tuesday, and one of the things that Rice was saying was like, hey, this is a space where we teach you how to build a business. That's very different than I teach you how to raise. That's very different than help you get the first check. It's not about the capital. Do you have something investable? Has to be the start. And I think platforms and cities that are teaching founders the math behind how to build something accretive, that's more important than the capital resource.
I think it's important, but let's talk about how often people are over-mentored and underfunded.
Well, wait. So I didn't say mentor. Wait. I didn't say mentor. I said educated.
But
I said that's a big difference.
We have
It's
a
big difference.
plethora of accelerators and incubators, and I'm talking for founders of color specifically. I know people that are not pre-revenue, pre-product. They have an MVP. They have a handful of customers. We're in Atlanta. I would love to bring up Calendly. And when I think of Calendly's trajectory in those early days, Taupe was able to raise $375,000. Everyone in this room knows. Before you got into tech, that may have sounded like a lot of money. But once you start doing this, that goes very, very quickly. And Calendly was in market. He had customers. He had revenue. No one wanted to give him his seed round. So he went back to the drawing board. He continued to build a business. He got the traction that he needed, and he was able to hit those milestones so he could have the proper narrative. So when he was able to raise his A round, it looked a little bit different.
And say the name of the guy that taught him how to do that.
Which is great, but how many, if I think about the folks that have Calendly's that they're working on right now, but that can't get the capital that they need to get to that very
But
next
what was the
milestone.
guy's name that gave it to him?
I don't know
ATV.
the man's name.
Okay, listen, the Calendly story is really interesting because he had that initial single seed investor, right? Actually, I forget the guy's name. I got to Google it. I don't want to hack it. But effectively, when he was at ATV, and this is why specificity is king, right? When he was at ATV, the timeline between him getting the early stage capital and the initial seed that backed him, it was a lot of bootstrap.
Yeah.
And he met one angel, and the angel doubled down. That's how he got his first 500K. The biggest issue was that Tope story is what, 7 years ago ish. So he was doing it at the really nascent stage of Atlanta.
Yeah.
Atlanta's way more developed now. I do agree that there's still a lot of Calendly's that aren't getting access, just like he wasn't. But at that point in time, he was like first. It was like Blavity back in the day in San Francisco when Morgan couldn't get her A done or her C done, right? Simply because she was first. I do think there are founders that pay the price of being first. To your point, you shouldn't have repeat issues of that if someone paid the price 7 years ago. But the downside is no one talks about his revenue. Like it wasn't just ARR. He was growing at like 300% quarter over quarter. Like he had like a real CAGR. Like he had the unit economics that VCs want. My position is simply we, from Goodie Nation down, have to be the fabric that speaks in unit economics and speaks in actual code language that investors want to speak in, right? So just simply saying that I'm an aggressive founder with a great story and a great pitch, that's not enough, right? What's your actual customer lifetime value? What's the ratio of how cheap your CAC goes down relative to how much of an increase your CLV goes up as you're growing?
I agree,
Right?
but
It's
even
like that has to be the narrative.
But to even get there, right? And that's the point that I'm making. I feel like we have a responsibility as ecosystem builders, as innovators, as disruptors in the cities that we are in to create change. So speaking for Atlanta specifically, if we talk about a funds of funds model, if we talk about making direct investments into startups, I look at what New York is doing right now. There's a seed matching program in New York. If you're raising your seed round, let's say Goodie Nation gives you 250K, the city will match that 250. So if you're trying to get to 3 million, now it gets a little bit easier for you to do that. If we talk about not being able to have access to that friends or that family round, does the city have government funding or resources where we can actually fund these companies so they can live to see another day? I talk to so many founders that, you know, like in terms of their savings, their mortgages, like we're in an impending recession with inflation. Like I think we have to be very, very honest about how do we get the capital into the hands of the people that need it the most? And what are we doing to make sure and ensure that that actually happens?
You're all right about that.
I just got to double.
Okay.
He stole all my thunder there with the code switching, and so I call it code switching, right?
Wait, what's code switching?
Code switching, right? Like, so look, we do it in our everyday lives, but as a founder, if you don't learn how to code switch between selling a customer, code switching between recruiting somebody to your firm, it's a whole nother like metrics that you're talking about, culture, all that kind of stuff, and raising money. And so I'm new to venture. I've been in venture for 4 years. Before that, I was on the other side of the table, right? And I had no idea about the language of, even though I'd raised money before, I had no idea how the language changes from C to A to B. And, so I'm down here, all I'm doing is customer discovery. I'm just talking to investors and like, okay, so talk to me like, okay, if I'm not doubling in revenue and I'm not cash flow positive, are you even thinking about anything else, right? And learning, just listening to their language and how they talk about stuff. 'Cause I'm trying to get smart I'm in the job of raising Series A's. We are a seed round investor. And so what we do, and we're kind of a studio model, so what we do is we spend half our time raising money for our firms. And if you don't learn that language of investing, so you got to remember, like you hit on something big, which is investors also have a hard time raising money. If you're a first time, if you're raising your first fund, it takes probably like 3-4x longer than somebody raising for a company. And the reason for that is language, right? Like so LPs speak a whole nother, capital allocators. I didn't even know they had that term, right? Capital allocators have a whole other language that I'm learning, right? So you have to learn your customer. You have to learn your customer speak so that they don't have to like shift through, through your kind of like basically babble because they're like, yeah, you're not talking in terms that I directly understand. So it comes back to that education. And so so community, content, community, and capital, the three things. That's how I always put it, right? The community provides the coaching, it provides the support so that you can understand the content. But what we do is we overteach on the company building, which is important.
Exactly.
Right? We overteach on the company building part, and we don't really teach people that it's just a different customer segment. You're learning how to go and message and get your first customers, but your investors are just another audience, another customer type. So for instance, everybody wants to go and like, okay, well, do you invest in B2B SaaS? Great, right. Go and look at, have they made money investing in this category before? I tell you, you are 10 times more likely to raise money from somebody who has made money doing something similar. Because again, like they can cut through the babble and kind of get to like, all right, I can see how we can make money doing this. Let's do business. But
That's diligence.
So I do want to leave time before lunch for questions from the audience. Excellent exchange. I'm gonna bring it back to cross-city collaboration, but just know that we have time for a few questions or comments from the audience because this is about creating cross-city collaborations. I know this guy. He's a part of my original startup from college. I know, his background in finance. And the reason he's able to talk the language is because of that background in finance and being in New York, a finance city. So you talk about education, we leverage the strengths of a New York City in all that type of finance-related knowledge, combined with, to your point of a venture an investor is they may live in the same building as you, right? Or they're right around the same corner.
Literally.
Stones throw away, right? Leveraging the types of knowledge on a city basis and then sharing that type of knowledge with the founders in Tulsa, with the investors in DC, with the founders and investors in LA and the founders in Atlanta, right? That's how we build a better startup community, leveraging local places, right? That's how we've got. And Atlanta has the same thing. Atlanta has some strengths that we could be able to share with folks in Tulsa and LA and so on and so forth. We got to be intentional around doing that.
I'll put myself out there. So I am a judge at 43 North in Buffalo, the startup accelerator pitch competition that gives $1 million to 5 companies. I'll be in Buffalo in 2 weeks judging. I'm down here because I work for Joey at Goody Nation. And yes, I, at 17 years old, freshman year in college, worked for Joey for his first company, Digital Guest List. I also am an EIR at Techstars, and I support Act House, led by Dominic Artis in Tulsa. So literally, Joey's point is I'm trying to be that connective tissue. And so if anyone wants to talk, please grab me afterwards.
What they're talking about is the information gap, which is a subset of the relationship gap. So again, quickly, any comments, questions for them around what's happening in their startup communities and perhaps how might we be able to create something over there?
What she talked about was the incrementality of getting the couple million, the few million that allows you to reinvest and continue to grow, which I feel like opens the opportunity. The pool of people, right, is bigger, and then it gets more notice with investors because there's people of color who are doing. There's more, right?
Yep.
So I would love to hear your thoughts on how she was thinking about deploying capital and funding differently. And in my head, I was like, all right, so Ariel, Keena, and Jewel in a room and the hackathon. I was like, I feel like everything's kind of building.
Yeah.
But I'm like, how do you create the space here that everyone over at Venture Atlanta wants to come over here because the conversations that are happening here are these ones that are super disruptive. Because I love your point about this room should be packed.
It should be,
this is the stuff that is changing the world.
Yeah, I think it's super simple. Jewel was spot on, and I 100% agree with her, because what I spend most of my time doing with startups is giving them feedback on incremental growth. I can care less how big your TAM is. It's often wrong, and if you can't even wrap your head around that, you shouldn't even be trying to do the math. But it comes down to something as simple as teaching a lot of the founders I work with to send out the best format for updates. There are so many founders who that's not even part of their thesis statement, which is I met you, we had a good vibe, maybe I sent you my deck or I didn't, but the first thing I said out of my mouth was, can I add you to my distribution list? The founders of color who have never even heard that thesis are mind blown because every VC says yes, and then when I teach them how to look through DocSend, they're like, oh shit, they open it. I'm like, yeah, they open it. They open it and they read it because their business model is tracking incremental growth. And so the moment you cut the narrative of $1 billion or nothing, 100 million ARR or nothing, and you actually talk about step functions of growth and being like a $50 million enterprise to get to your seed round or your A, like now all of a sudden you've made it digestible. So you've taken the fear out of it, and you've taken the FOMO or like the whole like I listen to podcasts and I think it has to be $1 billion business. Like so debunking that narrative is what I think Jewel was talking about, and she was spot on.
Yeah, and I would also say it's very hard to say whether a company is VC backable or not. I think it's highly subjective. But I do think it's important to educate founders on what their options are. So since we're in Atlanta, another lovely Atlanta story is MailChimp, right? Who has had a better exit than Ben Chestnut, who never raised one VC dollar? So I want to make sure that companies know, yes, you can bootstrap to a certain point. You can still go out and raise venture if that's what you want to do. You can bootstrap the whole way. You can go out and raise venture right away. You can get government contracts. You can do a blend of government contracts and grants and loans. Like whatever you need to do so you can hit those next milestones in your journey, ensuring that they're aware of the possibilities, and then us behind the scenes gathering our resources and creating that access so people can get the capital that they need to grow.
Yeah, building on that, you bring up a point about venture capital funding. So first of all, venture capital funding is never a goal. It should never be a goal. Your goal is how do I build a big ass company, and how do I have impact in the communities I want to serve? Venture capital is a tool that you can lever in that process. It's a tool to kind of like hire forward, market forward, all the kind of stuff you need to do because you just don't have the cash flow to do that. That's and there are other resources to that. Whether it's grants, there's all kinds of federal and state grants that you can do to do that. There's good old bank relationships that you can do to that depending on your business. Just have some working capital, line of credit. There's a lot of options there. So I think we kind of get a little bent around the axle around venture capital because we know the big names. But the sweet spot is actually never raise venture, grow your business to a $5-10 million business, and exit for $50 million, and own 80-90% of the company, and that's
No one
how
thinks
most
that's
people
sexy.
make money. Huh?
Yeah, the market doesn't think that's sexy.
I think that's sexy. I think that you're talking about education.
I think. But and here's the funny thing is, those founders who do that end up taking home as much money as the founder who raises hundreds of millions of dollars and have 5%
And has 1%.
Right,
But that's to your point, it's not sexy. But why is it not sexy?
That's not what the market says.
I know, but how do we turn it on us to change?
I think it's
the
education.
Goody Nation.
I think it
Like,
goes back.
educating them, but it is sexy. Like we're like, let's go back to education. Like I've almost everything that everyone has said, it's come back to education on some level. And I think the piece that we have to work on as like maybe connectors in our ecosystems is like making sure everyone, specifically underrepresented folks, have access to this education. But yeah, we need to make the narrative that it's sexy.
I was going to say, I completely agree with education. Speaks back to exposure because it gives you access to information, knowledge, opportunities that most people don't realize exist on how to build and grow a company. And then mindset-wise, I think we need to change the approach in how we cross through city collaborations. And there's this thing I push in Tulsa called community as a service. We all know SaaS and how SaaS changed the service industry, made it simpler, made it easier. If we take that same concept to how we approach community building, it goes from engagement to empowerment to actually getting things done for everybody across city. So I think just getting into that education, that exposure allows people the different opportunity, knowledge to learn how to go a different way that works best for them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So we are Atlanta. So just I want to wrap it up, and then we're gonna do some quick contact information responses and stuff. But you're absolutely right around the mindset piece. I think part of it, in addition to the education, is going to be it's a media narrative on a local level, right? On a local level, and I think a lot of programs that people that build community locally have to be intentional on having these conversations. Like, yo, it may not be sexy to go after the $5-10 million a year and have a $50 million exit, but you'll probably make just as much money in many cases, and you're more likely to have that type of outcome. It's got to be intentional. It's got to be local, and I think we can leverage examples from various cities, like in Atlanta. Like folks in Tulsa should know the story of MailChimp. They probably have heard of MailChimp. Everyone heard of MailChimp, right? I mean, as a product, right? But not the story of the founders. Leveraging virtual tools. I'm not saying that Ben Chestnut got to jump on a Zoom call with folks in Tulsa. Maybe, I mean, it's possible. But there are people, yeah, he's super cool, but I mean, there are people that can tell that story, and at least let's let them know. We have to be intentional on a city-by-city basis on, hey, perhaps this is it's not the only route to go. Look at some of the other capital options for people on the stage earlier and more, then let's make this stuff happen. So folks can get to lunch, just quickly do some, how can people get in contact with you? Celeste, I'll start with you.
Active on LinkedIn, always check my DMs. So my name's Celeste Shields on LinkedIn, probably is the best way.
There's not that many of me in the world, thankfully.
There's,
Although there is my dad, I am a junior. But,
there it is.
So I'm very active on LinkedIn. Pretty easy to find. LinkedIn/Maurice Boissier. Nothing fancy about it.
There it is.
Same, active on LinkedIn, first name, last name. I'm the only black one, so that and my email is isaiah.coleman@intulsa.com. Feel free to reach out anytime.
Recognize this trend. I'm the fourth person on stage to say this. LinkedIn. I respond to my LinkedIn DMs faster than text and email. So Keenan D. Williams at LinkedIn.
And not surprisingly, LinkedIn is definitely the best option for me. What I will say is, luckily, and also why I'm here today, is I started my career as a tech recruiter. I know not all people want to start companies. Some people just want to find jobs. So if that is you, I have a very long list of talent leaders that work at great companies throughout the space. If you see someone that's a second-degree connection and you need an introduction, let me know, and I'm happy to do it.
Why second-degree connection?
Education.
Well, it would be a second degree. Well, it would be my first degree, but it would be a second from that. You know what, Keenan? It's okay.
Specificity. Specificity. I'm just
education.
saying, right?
It's educating,
So-
making sure we all know.
We're going to talk.
But Joey, I think Ariel said something earlier that I actually have a question.
Okay, let's
Would Goody Nation ever be a VC?
And what?
Would Goody Nation ever become a venture fund?
We're working on a few things to help founders get capital. I'm not going to outright say, we're working on some interesting options to help founders get capital. One thing we have to say, I don't know if people got to go to lunch, is we're very intentional about the role that we play in the ecosystem. We don't want to compete with capital providers. We want to be able to make connections. And so, but there are times where we want to help out. And so we're thinking through that, always looking for advice. So give a hand to this awesome panel.